Most people at the company admired my boss. To us, he was the kind of man who always seemed to have everything under control. He built the business from almost nothing, treated his employees fairly, and somehow managed to stay calm even when everyone else was overwhelmed. During the 5 years I worked for him, I never heard anyone speak badly about him. If anything, people wanted to be more like him. What made him even more mysterious was his private life. We knew he was married, but that was about it. His wife never attended company dinners, holiday parties, or charity events. Whenever someone casually asked about her, he would smile politely and change the subject. After a while, everyone stopped asking. We simply assumed she preferred staying out of the spotlight. One Thursday evening, we had just finished a meeting with an important client. It had dragged on much longer than expected, and most of the office had already gone home. I was gathering my laptop when my boss stepped into my office. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked. "Of course." He glanced at his watch before letting out a quiet sigh. "Something urgent has come up. I need to meet another client across town, but my wife is waiting downstairs. Would you mind driving her home for me?" The request caught me completely off guard. Out of everyone in the company, he had chosen me. "Sure," I replied. "I'd be happy to." He thanked me with a grateful smile before handing me his car keys. "I appreciate it. She's waiting by the entrance." As I walked outside, I spotted a woman standing beside the black sedan. She looked elegant without trying too hard. Her clothes were simple but tasteful, and her posture carried a quiet confidence. Yet there was something about her expression that didn't match the image I had built in my mind. She looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally, as though she'd been carrying an invisible weight for years. She greeted me politely and thanked me for helping. Once we started driving, silence filled the car. It wasn't awkward, just unusually heavy. The city lights reflected across the windshield while soft music played in the background, but neither of us felt the need to speak. After several minutes, she looked out the window and quietly asked, "Have you worked with my husband for long?" "Almost 5 years." She smiled faintly. "Then you've probably spent more time with him than I have lately." I wasn't sure how to respond. I assumed she was joking, but the sadness in her voice suggested otherwise. A few more miles passed before the GPS announced we were only minutes away from her house. Just as I prepared to turn into her neighborhood, she spoke again. "Would you mind driving a little farther?" I glanced at her, confused. "Is everything all right?" She nodded slowly, but avoided my eyes. "There's a park just ahead. I'd like to stop there just for a few minutes." I didn't understand why someone would choose a quiet park over going home after a long day, but I agreed without asking more questions. She stepped out of the car and walked toward a bench overlooking the small lake. I stayed back, giving her space. For nearly 5 minutes, she simply stared at the water, without saying a word. Then, almost as if she were speaking to herself, she whispered, "Sometimes, home isn't the place you want to go." In that moment, I realized I wasn't looking at the wife of a successful businessman. I was looking at someone carrying a pain that no one else seemed to notice. That evening stayed in my mind far longer than I expected. I tried convincing myself it wasn't my place to think about my boss's marriage. People had difficult days. One quiet conversation in a park didn't mean anything was seriously wrong. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. A week later, just as I was shutting down my computer, my boss appeared beside my desk again. "I hate asking twice," he said with an apologetic smile, "but could you drive my wife home again? My schedule's a complete mess." I agreed without hesitation. This time, when she got into the car, the silence didn't feel as uncomfortable. She thanked me for helping and asked how work had been. We spoke about ordinary things at first: the traffic, the weather, the endless meetings that seemed to fill every workday. Slowly, the conversation became more natural. Over the next month, the same situation repeated itself several times. My boss never seemed to have enough time, and somehow I became the person trusted to make sure his wife got home safely. It was never planned. It just happened. With every drive, I learned a little more about her. She had once been an architect, but had stepped away from her career years earlier. She loved reading novels, gardening, and taking long evening walks. She spoke with intelligence and kindness, yet there was always an emptiness behind her smile, as though part of her had quietly disappeared. One evening, after several minutes of silence, she looked out the window and said, "People think being married to a successful man means you're lucky." I glanced at her briefly before returning my attention to the road. "It probably looks that way from the outside." She gave a soft laugh that carried no happiness. Success has a strange way of stealing time. At first, you tell yourself it's temporary. A few late nights become a few late months. Then years pass, and one day you realize you've been living with a stranger. I didn't know how to answer. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't criticizing her husband with anger. She simply sounded tired. "I know he works hard," she continued. "He believes he's doing it for us."
I don't doubt that.
But eventually you stop needing expensive gifts. You start wishing for an uninterrupted conversation. Her honesty made me uncomfortable because I knew the man she was describing wasn't the boss I saw every day. At the office, he remembered birthdays, asked employees about their families, and never forgot to thank people for working late. It was difficult to imagine him neglecting anyone. The more I listened, the more confused I became. Which version of him was real? At work, nothing had changed. My boss still carried himself with confidence, joking with employees and solving problems before anyone else noticed them. During one lunch break, he casually mentioned his wife while discussing vacation plans. "I owe her a proper holiday," he admitted. "She's been incredibly patient with my schedule." There was genuine affection in his voice. That conversation stayed with me because it didn't match the loneliness I kept hearing from her. For the first time, I wondered if marriages simply looked different from the inside than they did from the outside. Then everything shifted. One rainy evening, as I drove her home once again, her phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. Without answering, she quickly turned the phone over on her lap. A few seconds later, another call came. This time, she silenced it immediately. She noticed I'd seen her reaction and forced a nervous smile. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I nodded, pretending not to notice. After several moments, she looked at me with unusual seriousness. "I need to ask you something." "All right. If my husband ever asks, please don't mention that someone called tonight." Her words caught me completely off guard. Before I could ask why, she turned back toward the window, ending the conversation as though she regretted saying anything at all. For the rest of the drive, neither of us spoke. But from that moment on, I couldn't stop asking myself one question. Had I been witnessing the loneliness of an abandoned wife? Or had I unknowingly become part of a secret I was never supposed to discover? After that night, I couldn't look at either of them the same way. Whenever my boss thanked me for staying late or trusted me with another responsibility, I remembered his wife's request to keep that phone call a secret. Whenever I saw her quiet smile, I wondered who had been trying so desperately to reach her. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe it was a family member. Maybe an old friend. Maybe something she simply wasn't ready to discuss. But the uncertainty refused to leave my mind. A few days later, I had an afternoon meeting with a supplier across town. It finished earlier than expected, so I decided to grab a coffee before returning to the office. As I stood in line waiting for my order, someone near the window caught my attention. It was her. She hadn't noticed me. She was sitting across from a man I had never seen before. They weren't behaving like strangers having a casual business meeting. Their conversation was relaxed, personal. Every so often, he made her laugh in a way I had never witnessed during our drives. It wasn't loud laughter. It was the kind that escaped naturally after someone had been carrying sadness for too long. I stayed where I was, hidden by the crowd. Then I saw him gently reach across the table and place his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. That silent gesture told me everything words couldn't. I quietly left the cafe without ordering my coffee. The drive back to the office felt much longer than usual. I wasn't angry. I wasn't disappointed. I was simply shocked. All those conversations about loneliness suddenly carried a different meaning. She hadn't only been sharing her pain. She had already found someone willing to listen. Whether their relationship had become physical or remained emotional didn't change the fact that a line had already been crossed. The next morning, my boss called me into his office. "I wanted to thank you," he said. I looked at him, saying nothing. "I know I've asked a lot of favors lately. I don't usually mix work with personal matters, but you've always been someone I could trust." Those words landed harder than he could have imagined. Trust. It echoed in my head for the rest of the day. He continued speaking about an upcoming project, completely unaware of the storm inside my mind. I kept asking myself the same impossible question. Did loyalty to my employer mean telling him what I'd seen? Or did respecting someone else's marriage mean staying out of it completely? Neither answer felt right. A few evenings later, she called me herself. It was the first time she had ever contacted me directly. She asked if we could talk somewhere public, for just a few minutes. Curiosity got the better of me. When we met, she looked exhausted, as though she hadn't slept in days. Before I could ask anything, she spoke. "You saw us at the cafe." It wasn't a question. I nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment before taking a slow breath. "I suppose you deserve an explanation." I remained silent. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said. "There is someone else." Hearing her admit it so calmly made the truth feel even heavier. I never planned for this to happen. I didn't wake up one morning wanting to betray my husband. She stared down at her hands. "It started with conversations. That's all. Someone who asked how I was and actually waited for the answer. Someone who noticed when I wasn't pretending to be okay." She wiped away a tear before continuing. "I'm not proud of it. I know what people will call me if they ever find out." She wasn't asking me to approve. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was simply acknowledging the reality she could no longer escape. "I still care about my husband," she whispered. "But somewhere along the way, we stopped being husband and wife. We became two people living separate lives inside the same house." I finally found my voice. "Does he know?" She slowly shook her head. "No." As we stood to leave, she looked at me one last time. "I don't expect you to keep my secret," she said quietly. "You have to live with your own conscience, just as I have to live with mine." I watched her walk away, knowing that whatever decision I made next wouldn't simply change one life. It would shatter the fragile illusion that had been holding 3 lives together. For 2 days, I barely slept. Every possible decision seemed wrong. If I told my boss what I knew, I would be exposing a secret that wasn't mine to reveal. If I stayed silent, I would be protecting a lie from a man who had trusted me more than almost anyone else in the company. In the end, I chose neither. The next morning, I walked into my boss's office and handed him an envelope. He looked surprised. "What's this?" "My resignation." His eyebrows lifted. "Resignation? Did another company make you an offer?" I shook my head. "No. I just think I've become too involved in something that has nothing to do with my job. I respect you too much to pretend everything is normal, but I also don't believe it's my place to interfere in your personal life." He studied my face, searching for an explanation I wasn't willing to give. After a long silence, he accepted the envelope. "I don't understand," he admitted, "but I won't force you to stay." As I left his office, I felt no relief, only uncertainty. I hoped time would solve what I couldn't. It didn't take long. 3 weeks after my resignation, I received an unexpected phone call from my former boss. His voice sounded older. Not physically older, but emotionally exhausted. "Can we meet?" he asked. We met at the same quiet cafe where I had unknowingly witnessed the beginning of the end. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence. "I know." Those 2 words carried months of pain. He explained that he had found messages on his wife's tablet while trying to fix a software issue. At first, he wanted to believe there was another explanation. But after confronting her, she admitted everything. She didn't deny the emotional affair. She didn't invent excuses. She accepted responsibility for her choices. What surprised him most wasn't her confession. It was what she said afterward. "She told me she had been trying to reach me for years," he said quietly. "Not with accusations. With conversations. I was always too busy to notice." He rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them. I spent years believing I was giving my family everything they needed. He looked up at me. I gave them security. A painful smile crossed his face. But I forgot to give them myself. I listened without interrupting. There was no anger in his voice. No desire for revenge. Only regret. A few months later, I happened to run into his wife while leaving a bookstore. She looked different. Not happier. Just more honest with herself. After a brief greeting, she told me they had decided to separate peacefully. There wasn't enough trust left to rebuild, she admitted. Sometimes saying goodbye is less painful than pretending nothing is broken. I asked about the other man. She looked away for a moment before answering. That relationship ended too. I must have looked surprised because she gave a faint smile. It was never really about him. I thought another person could fill the emptiness inside my marriage. I was wrong. Until I faced my own choices, nothing was ever going to make me happy. There was no victory in her voice. Only acceptance. As we parted ways, I realized everyone had paid a price. My boss lost the marriage he believed was stable. His wife lost the life she had spent years building. The man she turned to disappeared once reality replaced secrecy. And I lost a job I genuinely loved simply because I had been standing too close when someone else's life began to fall apart. Several months later, my former boss called me again. This time, there was peace in his voice. I wanted to thank you, he said. For what? For not making the decision for us. I didn't answer. He continued. If you had told me, I probably would have blamed only her. If you had hidden everything forever, I would have continued living a lie. Instead, the truth came when it had nowhere left to hide. Painful as it was, we faced it ourselves. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. People often believe betrayal begins with a single mistake. It rarely does. More often, it begins with conversations that never happen, feelings that go unnoticed, and silence that slowly replaces honesty. By the time someone crosses the line, the distance between two people has usually been growing for years. That entire chapter of my life started with what seemed like an ordinary favor. My boss simply asked me to drive his wife home. I never imagined that one short drive would place me in the middle of a marriage that had already begun falling apart long before I ever turned the key in the ignition.